How is everybody doing?
Otherwise, I would have.
Good.
Well, welcome you all to the Milton City Hall, and it's 6 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting of Milton Common Council for November 14th to 2018 to order. And the first item is the roll call.
Kuhn,
Here.
Burke,
Present.
Teal,
Here.
West,
Present.
Olson,
Here.
Ramsey,
Here.
Sullivan,
Here.
Richard.
Here.
Okay, the next item is Bill Burns with the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a presentation prepared, go through some information to set the context before the public hearing and the budget deliberations. So what I'll go through is give a brief update on the current status of the budget, given the action of the council at the last council meeting. The published budget was based on the actions that were recommended coming out of the Finance Committee and Personnel Committee discussions. So I do have some information on what is included in the recommended budget as published, and I'll explain the differences based on the council's action. Then have some information projecting the impact on the property tax rate and levy for the city. Some information on questions that we received from elected officials related to the budget. And then finally, have some information on the budget scenarios, including a balanced budget scenario without the new revenue source, and then where we are for next steps for the public hearing and deliberations. So to give an update on the budget status, the budget as recommended by the Finance Committee and authorized for publication included the shifting of the cost for public fire protection, which are the water utility costs related to additional water capacity and hydrants related to ability to provide flows for fire. That would shift that billing from the general fund, supported by the property tax, to utility customers as a direct billing mid-year 2019. We're estimating that that would free up about $240,000 in the general fund in 2019, and an additional roughly $240,000 in the general fund the following year with the full year implementation. The budget, as recommended, had allocated roughly 1/3 of that savings in the general fund to personnel items, and 2/3 of that amount towards the fire and EMS capital reserves. As you know, the council considered at the last regular council meeting a resolution to implement the fire protection fee billing change, and that resolution failed. So we do not have that additional capacity within the general fund for that $240,000. The budget, as published, which had included that additional revenue source, had $68,500 in general fund personnel items. Those items were hiring a full-time police sergeant and backfilling a police officer, and that was planned to be implemented in the fourth quarter of 2019. It included $13,000 in additional funds for public land seasonal employees, $12,580 for additional public work seasonal employees. There was a net shift in recreation wages with an offsetting revenue. There was acting forester compensation, $6,566, and then a part-time increase in the part-time court clerk hours from 15 to 20 hours per week, and some additional hours for the substitute dining coordinator at the senior center. Also included in that recommended budget was roughly $20,000 for mid-year compensation and merit adjustments. And the budget also includes sufficient personnel contingency that would support a 2% cost of living adjustment for employees. That's the amount that was settled for the police contract. At this point, the EMS contract is still in negotiations, so we have an amount in the personnel contingency related to that contract, but we don't have final cost or settlement from that contract. Other items included in the budget outside of the general fund, well, this actually does relate to the general fund as well. The general fund has a transfer to the library fund of $93,000. That would meet the requirement for exemption under the Dane County library tax, exempting Middleton residents from that separate tax from the county and making the city eligible for Dane County library aid. And within the library's budget, that would provide them with enough funding to hire a full-time librarian with an annual cost of just under $80,000. One of the items that we'll discuss tonight was the Recreation Department is seeking to increase the part-time recreation assistant to full-time, and they believe that they can support the additional $12,000 cost through additional revenues. So that would be an item that's not in the budget as recommended, but a potential item for consideration by the council if you would want to add that revenue and expenditure. There's also within the youth center budget an increase for an internship program, and that would be funded through donations. Some other key items that are included in the budgets as recommended is a capital borrowing plan that includes $3.5 million in total capital borrowing, with $2 million targeted towards street projects. It would fully fund the city's vehicle replacement plan, using about $220,000 that we have in remaining fund balance for that plan, as well as $500,000 in capital borrowing. The budget would qualify for the expenditure restraint program. It would meet or be within the city's levy limit and utilize the full levy limit capacity available to the city. We're projecting a property tax levy increase of 2.8%. And as I mentioned, as published, the budget included the public fire protection fee shift. I'm not going to go through line by line on these, but just for reference, in your packets and the materials that were sent out is a listing of the revenues and expenditures by fund for the city, the breakdown of the general fund revenues and expenditures by category. We have a listing of the general capital borrowing for 2019, and this is one item where the council has considered this list and an initial approval of the capital items to be funded at the meeting in October. Although we're only adopting the budget for capital for 2019, for the last couple of years, we've been putting together a projection showing that if the goal is to stay within that target of $3.5 million per year, what that could mean for available funds by different areas. That's subject to review by the council each year. But the plan and direction has been to target around $2 million per year for streets and about $500,000 per year for the vehicle replacement plan. That leaves about $1 million for other capital borrowing in each year. We know in 2020 and 2021 that there's some larger public safety capital items that are coming for police and also with the EMS department. So if we look at what those items are that we're anticipating based on the department requests, this shows what would be available for other areas. So that would be projected for 2020 that you might be looking at if police and EMS combined is around $350,000. That would leave about $50,000 for admin, IT, building inspection, library, $100,000 for other public works and vehicle replacement, and around $500,000 for public lands and conservancy. Again, subject to review each year, but just in rough dollars, that's what we'd be looking at based on direction from the prior years. The budget for debt service would be about $5 million in total sources and uses of funds. The largest source of revenue is the property tax levy. We also have some revenue coming from Build America bond subsidies for some of the debt that was issued under that program several years ago, impact fees being applied. And then we had a debt service premium on the debt that we issued in 2018. That remains in the debt service fund balance and needs to be applied to future years, so we're showing that being applied in 2019. This is a slide you've seen before in earlier presentations, but this is looking at if we continue to target $3.5 million of general capital borrowing each year, what our projected impact is on the debt service levy and tax rate. And the plan that the council's been following would show steady increases in the debt service mill rate of about 3% per year and show that peaking at just under $2 per 1,000 for the tax rate, and that would be around 2025, 2026, and then that's projected to start to drop off as some of the debt for previous facilities is paid off. So if we shift from that to looking at the property tax impacts based on the budget, to provide a little bit of context, I wanted to update this slide, which looks at where the city of Middleton is in comparison to other municipalities in Dane County. Middleton is fortunate that it has one of the lower local tax rates in the county. City of Madison is the highest at almost $9 per thousand. Cities of Fitchburg, Stoughton, Sun Prairie, the next three. Middleton is the second lowest city, with only the city of Verona being lower and there are some villages that are lower. Middleton's at just under $6 per thousand. And then we also looked at a comparison to look at some of the more similar sized communities, some that are a little larger, some that are a little smaller than Middleton, and look at what their equalized tax rate would be, what that tax would be on a home at $350,000, which was about what the average home price was in Middleton for the prior year. Several of those communities have a fee for refuse and recycling that's added to the tax bill. Middleton and Wanakee do not. So when we look at what the total local city or village portion of the tax bill would be, plus that recycling or refuse fee, there's a big range in what the amounts are that would be paid. In this example, the highest would be the city of Fitchburg at $3,136 for this home. A similarly valued home in Middleton would be about $2,000 a year, a little over $2,000. So there's a pretty big spread in what communities would be paying, and that's largely due to that difference in tax rates on the previous slide. As I mentioned, the budget as recommended would be just under the city's maximum levy limit allowance. Our levy limit is limited to the growth of net new construction, and there is no inflation factor in that. So that just looks at how much additional construction have we had in percentage terms, and that's the amount you're allowed to increase your general operating levy. So for the city of Middleton for this tax year, that's just over 3%, and the budget as recommended is within $389 of that total. So if we look at the tax levy, which is the total amount that's being collected for the city, we have the general fund levy at about $12.8 million. The debt service levy is just under $4.7 million. Total property tax levy would be $17,490,293, and that's a total change or increase in the amount to be collected of 2.8%. And we've looked at both what's called the equalized tax rate and the assessed tax rate. The assessed tax rate is the rate that's printed on your tax bill, and that's based on the assessed value. So that's the one when somebody's looking at what's their house assessed at, multiply that by the tax rate, that's their total amount of taxes they're paying. That is going down by projection of 10.7%, and that is going down so much primarily because there was a revaluation in Middleton for 2018. So in general, property assessments increased. When assessments increase, that's a certain amount that you're collecting from the levy, you're dividing it by a larger number, the rate is going to go down. To compare ourselves from year to year or looking from one municipality to another, we can also look at an equalized tax rate, and that takes the total amount that we're collecting and divides it by our equalized value. The state of Wisconsin prepares equalized property values each year, and they look at what's your assessment overall for the city compared to the overall fair market value. And in revaluation years like this one, the two are very similar because where assessments are targeting at 100%. In years where you don't have a revaluation, equalized value would normally increase each year as property values go up and your assessed values stay constant. So we put that in just for comparison. I think it's good for comparing to prior years and other municipalities. That's projected to go down about 3%, and that's primarily due to just the overall growth in property tax base and values within Middleton. Because it's a revaluation year, how the taxes will affect an individual property will depend on how much their assessment changed compared to the average assessment change. In this slide, I've looked at what an average single-family home would experience, and according to information from the city assessor, the average home value in Middleton for a single-family home was just under $350,000 last year. They would have a 15% average assessment increase, and the current average single-family value is just over $400,000. So for that theoretical average home, they would have a $52,400 increase in their assessment. Their tax rate, so the assessed tax rate on the tax bill is projected that would go down, that 10.7%, or about 70 cents. So their net taxes for the city would increase by $63 annually, which is about a 2.7% increase. How an individual property is affected will depend on how much they changed compared to the average. So if you had a home that their assessment increased, but it increased by less than the average, their taxes may stay the same. They could even go down in some cases, depending on how much their assessment changed. On the other side, if you had a property whose assessed value went up more than the average, say 20 or 25%, they would experience a larger increase than this 2.7%. Then shifting from the property taxes, we wanted to provide some information in response to questions that we've received. One of those questions is, why isn't the amount of the state levy limit sufficient to meet the city's needs in Middleton? And I think one of the primary factors for that is that the levy limit by the state no longer has an inflation component. It's only looking at net new construction growth. And for a growing community like Middleton, we're experiencing both increases in population and service demands, as well as inflation costs on what our costs are to provide services.
Bill, that net new construction is new construction outside of a TIF district?
It's actually both. The percentage that we're allowed to make the adjustment for the levy limit, they look at citywide net new construction. Even though it doesn't directly affect your tax rate, it is considered for purposes of the levy limit program. But even with that, we're experiencing growth across the whole city, plus inflation. So this chart just looks at, if we look at the percentage change in population and the percentage change in inflation each year, and compared that to what the net new construction percentage is, in every year that we looked at over the past 7 years, net new construction has been below the combined rate of population and inflation growth. Next question was, how has the city's tax rate changed over time? And on this slide, we're showing both the equalized and the assessed mill rate, because I think the equalized mill rate is good to look at for comparison from year to year. And you can see the impact of those revaluation years, that when a revaluation's done, your two tax rates are going to be very similar because your assessments are at 100%. Generally, that there's going to be a spread in those rates until you get to another revaluation, and then they come back together at a single point. I think kind of the takeaway from this slide is the tax rate's been pretty consistent, perhaps even a slight downward trend in the city of Middleton over the last 7 years. Another question is, what is the city of Middleton's share of the total property tax bill? So although the city collects taxes, the city's share is a little under a third of the total tax bill. The largest piece is the school district, followed by the city, and then there's also the amount that's collected for the county and MATC. There was also a very small state piece, but that was eliminated within the state budget. So it's now school district followed by city, county, and MATC that make up the tax bill. And a couple questions came in related to the public fire protection fee that was discussed earlier in the process. We had talked at a previous meeting about what the impact would be on a single-family home, and if that is implemented based on meter size, most single-family homes would have a 5/8 inch meter, and that would be an annual cost of just under $50 per year. There was also a question about multifamily residential for apartment buildings, and apartments generally would pay based on the size of the meter going into the building, rather than having individual meters going to individual units. So we looked at some examples, and I've got 5 on here from different apartment projects, including some newer and some older projects. And we looked up how many meters are coming into those complexes, what are the size of those meters, and then if you look at that total cost for that apartment building or apartment development, and divide that by the total number of units in the apartment or the development to see what that cost would be on a per unit basis per year. And the range from these examples was between $7.78 per unit per year up to $24.64 per unit per year. Generally, the larger the building, the lower that cost is going to be, because you have some efficiencies that you might have a 3-inch water line that comes in, and if that's servicing 74 or 95 units, when you look at the cost per unit, it's a smaller cost than what it would be for a smaller building. If the city were to implement a fee like this, we don't have control over how landlords would charge their rent, if they would make adjustments or not based on an increase in fees. But I just thought it was good information to let people know that it's not necessarily that the cost would be $50 per unit in those buildings. It would generally be something quite a bit less than that. There was also been some questions of how that proposed fee would compare to other municipalities. We had some information included in materials that were sent out with the budget. This is kind of the full list of different cities and villages in Dane County that have implemented public fire protection fees. And the proposed fee in Middleton would have been the lowest out of those different communities. Finally, I wanted to get into the discussion of the budget scenarios. With the action of the council to not support the change in the public fire protection fee, essentially, I think for the budget, that would put us back to scenario 1 from the various scenarios that were presented to the finance committee. Scenario 1 was a base budget that did not have any of the general fund personnel increases and did not include the additional revenue source from the public fire protection shift. So with that, that scenario 1 would be a balanced budget without that revenue. And this slide illustrates the different personnel items that would need to be removed in order to get to that point, as well as the additional funding for the fire EMS capital reserve that was part of the budget discussion at the finance committee. There's also some other items we wanted to put out there for consideration by the council. One number that we've learned since the finance committee meetings took place is we did get the final exempt computer aid number from the state of Wisconsin. The state did include a small inflationary component to that, and that'll bring in an additional $6,188 next year compared to the estimates that we had been using. One item that came up in the bargaining discussions with the EMS unit is there was a concern about the uniform account and the ability to fully fund all of the items that are needed for uniforms within that. And one of the items that was discussed is rather than, as part of the negotiations, looking at establishing a per employee uniform allowance, seeking to just add some funds to that budget line item that could be used by the EMS chief at his discretion when he feels that additional uniform items are needed. That wasn't something that was in the original budget request because this came in later than the process during the negotiations. That would be one option to consider, using a portion of those additional exempt computer aid funds. For discussion purposes, we just showed potentially putting the rest of that towards general contingency, but obviously that could be used for any other purpose in the budget. Item 2A and B is the item that I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, that the Recreation and Public Lands Department is requesting an increase in the assistant recreation position and funding that through an increase in recreation revenues. So that would be a potential offset with revenues and expenditures in the general fund. For the planning department, since there was not support for an adjustment to increase hours for the sustainability coordinator as requested, they've proposed an alternative of increasing that position from 20 hours a week to 24 hours a week with about an $8,000 cost, and funding that by using existing budget dollars from the sustainability committee and from the planning intern line item. So that would be a net zero on expenditures, just repurposing a portion of those funds. And then the final item on here is related to the target for the EMS capital reserve. And there was discussion at the finance committee that $60,000 per year is likely not adequate based on the current cost of ambulances and anticipated inflation by the time we would get to the next ambulance replacement. This item would increase that target from $60,000 to $80,000. That might be something the city wants to increase further, or look at on an annual basis of adding an inflation component to that. But this was to try to address that concern that was raised by the finance committee. Since we don't have a dedicated funding source for this, the flip side of that would be budgeted use of surplus, if that surplus is available, unless there's another funding source identified. For the expenditure restraint program, this is likely not going to be a major factor in this budget. We do have the final numbers on our allowable increase for the expenditure restraint program. We would be allowed a 4.2% increase in the growth of our budget for 2019 in order to continue to qualify for that program. That's about a $900,000 increase. And in the recommended published budget, we are not close to that. We're at more about a $213,000 increase. So I think any of the budget scenarios we'd be looking at would qualify for that program. And based on the final decisions by the council, we could look and see if there's any kind of more technical adjustments we could make to position ourselves better in the future, but we should be well under that limit. And so then the last slide here is just talking about where we are as far as next steps and process. Obviously, tonight is the budget public hearing and discussions and deliberations and any potential budget amendments. And then there would be council action tentatively planned for next Tuesday for action on the budget and the tax levy.
Thank you, Bill. So the next is the public hearing. Okay, so the next item is the public hearing, and I'm going to open the public hearing part of the meeting. You have 3 minutes to speak. Please identify yourself and then where you live, and you have 3 minutes. So, anybody who wants to speak.
You and one other person.
Right now? Put it in between us and then.
Good evening. My name is Kirsten Klockner, and I live on
Thank you, sir.
on Valley Ridge Road in Middleton. I want to thank the alders who voted yes to pass the funding for the Northeast Commuter Trail along Century Avenue. I want to thank you for helping not only me, but other cyclists and pedestrians be able to bike to school and work safely. I want to thank you for providing children to get to school and help prevent obesity and type 2 diabetes, since we're starting the Safe Routes to School program hopefully this next year. I want to thank you for caring about people and caring about the community and the environment. For those who voted no for the Northeast Commuter Path, I would ask you, what is it going to take? Maybe you feel that there aren't funds right now, or that this is not the right time, but what is going to be the right time? Is it going to make somebody getting killed the right time, or children having severe obesity issues in our community and our environment going down? This is the right time. I know that funding is tight, but this has been a fight for over 10 years, and Century Avenue is only going to get less safe. I have close calls on a weekly basis biking from my home to work at Harbor Athletic Club, and that is biking on the sidewalk now. I don't dare bike on the road unless it's about 2 p.m. in the day. With the developments that are happening on the north side of Lake Mendota with Bishop's community, we have seen such an uptick in not only car traffic, but things like heavy machinery, dump trucks. Century Avenue is not safe. The Sharon Be Aware director for the Bike Fed and the person who does the Safe Routes to School for the Bike Fed said he feels the least safe road to bike on in Dane County. And he has to bike on it regularly to go and work at schools. So I would ask those who voted no and who did not feel that there were enough funds right now, or that this is not the right time, to reconsider their vote. My life is at risk. Children's lives are at risk. Fellow cyclists' lives are at risk, and pedestrians as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. And the next one is Jack Polk.
Good evening, I'm Chuck Falk, I'm the Middleton Police Chief. I sent all of you folks a message, so I think you know what I'm going to say, but I want to say it in public also. Please support funding for the modest proposals for additional staffing, merit pay, and public safety capital reserves for fire and EMS, as had been agreed upon by the Personnel and Finance Committees during previous budget deliberations. I don't think that any staff member was satisfied with the compromise which was brokered by Alder Sullivan and modified by the Personnel Committee. It certainly was not extravagant. But we all understood the fiscal constraints felt by the city, and we felt this was a reasonable way to get us through the 2 years before a referendum to increase levy limits could be reached. failure to come up with a funding model will make 2019 a difficult budget year. It will be a disaster for 2020. Obviously, the council is split on this issue, with the vote resulting in a tie last week, broken by the mayor. For those voting against the public fire protection model, it strikes me that some don't like the funding mechanism, and some think we have enough staff to provide adequate services. For those of you who don't like the public fire protection model, I ask for your solutions. What else can we do? Bill and Melissa from the finance department came up with a totally reasonable, legal, ethical way to cover a shortfall that was not of your making. The same state legislators that put us in this bind crafted laws to make this allowable. As a matter of fact, we're one of the few cities who have not taken advantage of this method. It's been estimated that this will cost $50 per household, but as you just saw, many apartments will be much less than that. So if you voted no on this because you felt it was unfair, the monetary amount for your constituents living in an apartment or people of poverty, I would ask you to reconsider, because we're talking $1 a month in many cases. It's not, it does not disproportionately affect people of poverty. It also allows for users to pay their fair share, something that government buildings, churches, and nonprofits currently are not paying. For those of you who think we have adequate staffing to provide adequate services, I respectfully disagree. I have shared with you the metrics from the police department. We're pretty easy to measure, as we are data-driven and have years of records to make comparisons. Why would it be any different for any other city department? I am a proponent of urban infill. I support many of the projects that have been approved and think our community will be better off when they are completed. But common sense dictates that as we increase our population, increase our high-density housing, including over 700 apartments that are in the hopper right now, support a thriving, growing business and commercial community, and offer more entertainment venues, that we will need more city staff to adequately serve the needs of those living, working, going to school, and passing through our community. Again, I ask you to reconsider the public fire protection model to fund these modest proposals, or find a different way to fund them, or put a moratorium on future development until we can adequately staff our growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. So the next one is Ron Beinsell. Ron, how about that?
Hey, yeah, very good. So I'm Ron Benzel, and I live at 7101 Friendship Lane, 7201, excuse me, Friendship Lane. And I'm here to talk in support of the Middleton Commission on Youth. But before I do that, I really want to just give a good shout out and compliments to the Middleton Police Department for the way that they handled the shooting in Greenway, and also all of you who responded and got us and went beyond the line of duty in terms of the Great Flood, specifically Matt Amundsen. He's just been tremendous for doing this. So with respect to the youth center, which is what my focus on at this point is, there are 4 elements that are the cornerstone of any youth center, and maybe others too. First is people, staff, volunteers. We have some incredible people, and you've heard from them earlier in the year, and you've seen what they can do. I think we should really commend them, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get the kind of modest increase for the assistance that we need. The second thing that is important is to have good policies. You might call those rules. You know, it's a policy about how you treat each other. It's a policy about how the interactions within the youth center. And those policies and rules, we have some excellent efforts at that, primarily because of the people that are involved. The third issue that the foundation is programming. And I would say to you that we have an average of 50 to 60 kids that come to the Youth Commission to participate in the programming. Our staff has developed programming that works, that's attractive, and it brings in kids who participate in some excellent programming. The fourth item, and this is the one that I wanted to really focus on, is place. Currently, The youth center is at Clark Street. As we all know, after the referendum, that's going to go away. We need to have a more specific and planful way of integrating, of creating a youth center facilities in our community, whether it's at the high school or whether it's repurposing parts of Cromrie or whatever, but there needs to be more of a long-range plan, and I think the Youth Commission, we would be very happy to be a part of that long-range planning to help us make sure that we have this resource in the future and beyond. So that's an important thing to have. Finally, I would say that in a recent one of our Middleton newspapers, facetiously and rhetorically, I hope, it asked whether or not the youth center is a need or a want. And I would posit to you that for the kids that are there and their families, it's a very much of a need. And I hope we are able to honor and respect those needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron.
Mayor?
What?
Ron, thank you for thanking us, but I want to thank you. I know you spent much of your career working for youth in the county, and now you're volunteering in our community, so thank you.
You're very, very welcome. It's a pleasure. And it's really, this community is fantastic. So, and my timer is up, so I did 3:30. But this community is really a fantastic place to live in. And the reason is, I think, we don't just settle for the bare bones. We recognize that taxes are the price that we pay for a civilized society and a community, and the people within Middleton are willing to do that, witness the referendum, and all kinds of other ways, and the youth center. So it's a great place to live, and I thank you all for helping to make that.
Great job, Ron, and I guess the place is very important because of the referendum has passed, so we got to find some alternative. So the next one is Alan Lindgren.
Hi, folks. It's always nice for me to be on this side of the table because I don't sit on the other side anymore. But I did want to also talk about the quality of life that we have all worked to achieve here in Middleton, Cross Plains, Middleton, sorry, not Cross Plains, Middleton. I'm just talking about Middleton tonight. And I think I was thinking about why people love Middleton, and I thought of 3 S's, or things that they are talking about. One of them is schools, and obviously we have strong support for our schools, and people come here because of the schools. Part of it is safety. We live in a very safe community. Our police department, our fire department have great reputations. And the other, of course, is streets, which you guys have to tackle. And I'm not going to touch that one. But I did want to talk about the safety issues because I was thinking about the statistics that our police chief gave us and how much time they get to spend now doing non-arresty kinds of things that they're working with the community. And it reminded me of some of the parenting things I remember from ancient days when I had little kids. And one of the books recommended that there should be 3 positive interactions with your kid for every one sort of corrective, maybe a little bit negative interaction. And then they will have a positive attitude towards you as a parent. And I didn't always follow that rule, but I think it's a good one. And when I think about the number of police that we have in this area and the number of positive interactions they have with our citizens and with our kids, I think it's outstanding. And to me, it's viewing police as helpers as opposed to coming to get the bad guys and putting cuffs on people and putting them in a car and writing them up. I really like the image of police as helpers. And I think all of us probably who sit here also view our police as helpers and not as the bad guys or people coming to get the bad guys. And I would like to see that continued in our community because in looking at other historical communities where they've whittled away at the number of police and the amount of time they have to spend in the community, once they lose that, they're never going to get it back. And I worry with this assessment that was a tie vote and then got voted down that we are going to lose that. And I think that there's a really great way for you guys to change your minds. It's a sign of maturity that people can listen to facts and change their minds and support the very legitimate request to increase our police force with some of the money from that. And I hope that we can maintain the camaraderie that we have with the police and the feeling within the community that they are the good guys and they are the helpers. Because whenever there's a crisis, you know what our good friend in the good neighborhood said, you look for the helpers. And I certainly always look for the police in the neighborhood. There's always a friendly wave, and the only time I've ever had a crisis, they came, they were as wonderfully trained as I could ever anticipate. They took care of the young woman who had come to my door in distress beautifully. They handled her wonderfully. She was a student of color. She had apprehensions about the police, and they dealt with her really well. And to me, it showed the amazing training that they've had and the example from the police chief and the mucky mucks up there. So I am beseeching you to reconsider and to change your votes on that, because I think it's a very legitimate thing. Our community expects you to be leaders. Our community expects to have a safe area to live in and to work in. And I think that those are important things to be responsive to in the budget. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for doing great things for the schools and working hard for the city of Middleton. Thank you. Anyone else who wants to speak? Mike Davis.
That's my name. I would like to ask the council to also reconsider the vote on the public fire protection fee. And I recognize that there are valid reasons for some of your votes against that. One of those was concerned that it could be a regressive tax. I think the information that Bill presented tonight shows that it would not be. Single-family homes would pay more, and proportionately more so than renters would pay. So I think that's a very important thing, because like Emily, I care about the folks who are renting and having a hard time affording living in the community. But I think we presented information that should hopefully change your mind on that. There's other reasons that I would encourage you to consider changing your minds on that. One of which is the concerns for equity for our people living in the community. In the eyes of some folks, we have wasteful spending. However, when we talk about the importance of a community that cares about everyone, consider the need for the library. There's no charge for entering the library. The senior center, the youth center, our splash pad. Sometimes it brings tears to my eyes going to the splash pad during the summer and seeing kids of all backgrounds playing together. And there's no cost for that. Our trails, our parks, our public transit, our community policing and our outreach programs by the police department, by EMS and the fire department. Now, some folks might say that's wasteful spending. I think it's absolutely necessary, and it's what makes us the Good Neighbor City. And there's a lot of reasons to support an additional revenue source to keep our staffing at a reasonable level so that we can support continuing those very much needed services. They may not be considered the core services in the community, but they're absolutely necessary. And so I do ask you to consider changing your votes on that resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else want to speak? Okay, anyone else want to speak? So I'm going to close the public hearing part of the meeting, and we move on to the budget deliberations.
Oh, Mayor, I forgot one other item.
Mhm.
You had asked me today if we could separate out each of those budgets
Yes.
on next week's agenda. And I
Mhm.
just wanted to make sure the council was aware that you had made that request
Yes.
so that the operating budget, the capital budget, and the special revenue budgets would each be separate votes.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Who wants to start? I have few questions here.
So I just have a question about that. So the mayor is not a member of the council, so to separate out a vote, it would have to be made by a member of the council. Isn't that correct?
Well, the full council could weigh in on procedurally how they would like the budget to be considered.
Uh-huh.
That's why I'm making you aware of
Okay.
what the mayor has asked us to do. We have a time-honored tradition to try to honor any one of your requests for being on the agenda. However, the majority has a place, has a role in deciding how that's placed on the agenda.
And my memory is that we always vote as the budget, so it's an up or down vote. You can amend it, but it's a one vote.
In recent years, we have done that. We went
Okay.
back and looked at it because the mayor had asked, and I believe it was about 4 or 5 years ago, where we changed going from an individual vote on each one of those to a vote in total with a resolution supporting the budgets and a resolution supporting the levy amount, right? Levy rate,
Levy, yeah.
just the levy.
Yes, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I would go along with separating out the specific budgets so that we can vote on each one individually.
Yep,
And I would make that motion.
okay, need a second?
Second that for discussion. I'd like to understand why only 3 as opposed to, I understand operating, I understand some of the capital, but I think we need to figure out whether we want to do capital by fund or whether we're doing or functional area.
I actually did ask the operating capital enterprise funds, this is how we used to do it. I mean, when I came on the council in 2008, that's how we did. So it just, for whatever reason, changed a few years ago. So I guess John Lehman was I don't know what the reason was, but that's how we have always done in the past, so. And that's how I think it should be
So
done.
I'm
and
recommending we vote separately on capital,
Yeah,
operating, enterprise
and the
funds.
enterprise funds, and if you like to add whatever, I think, I don't see any reason why not, so.
I'm not understanding why we would do that. Can you explain?
Because I think various ones of us have issues with specific parts. I mean, I don't have issues with the enterprise funds. I do have issues with the operating budget and the fire hydrants. I don't necessarily have an issue with the capital funds, and they're somewhat separate because they have different revenue sources.
Yeah, but Joanna, this is how we used to do it, and I think,
Well,
I don't know how
think
the
that's- I think
other
it's-
cities do
I
it.
think it's more, then otherwise we have to come up with, deal with the operating budget first.
I still don't understand what you mean by we have to deal with the, I mean, we're doing all the preliminary work now.
Okay,
So we make a vote.
could we at least discuss each one separately and start with the operating budget?
So when
So
you're,
that we're not bouncing back and forth, but
so when you say the operating budget, you're not talking that we're gonna separate out every different revenue source
no,
that
I'm
goes with
talking
each
about
of those
voting
programs?
on the whole operating budget versus what we borrow.
So the concept that the mayor expressed to me was the entire operating budget, the entire capital budget, and the entire, he said enterprise funds, but I think special revenue funds incorporates a lot more of that.
Well, there's a big difference between enterprise funds and special revenue.
Yeah, I think special revenue includes all of those, including.
But the special revenue is
enterprise.
in the operating, it's part of your budget. So that's what that's what I'm trying to just get an idea in my head what we're talking about. I can
Okay.
understand that you do the capital and the operating, because one is borrowing and, and they're not linked, except for one line item for the
Right.
debt service. But what would be the reason you would do operating and a revenue source?
He just wanted to go back to the way we used to do it, and that's the way we used to do it.
Can we identify the specific enterprise funds that we would vote on separately? One would be airport, one would be golf course, one would be the water utility.
Sewer.
water and sewer
And I
utility.
think there are other special revenue funds that are minor in materiality that we have to approve budgets for as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna suggest that maybe rather than saying operating, which could mean different things to different people, as we identify which funds we're talking about, and I would suggest the general fund is what a lot of times we call the operating
Okay,
yeah.
fund.
General
Or perhaps
fund.
general fund and debt service, because those are
Yes.
the two that have a levy component to them.
Those are what I'm talking about.
But you need to include the library funds in there as well with that discussion, right? Because the general fund is subsidizing the library operations, that has to be part of that discussion.
We don't
That's-
get, we only decide
But that's in the
on
general
total
fund.
amount.
That's not, there's not a
Transfers in.
special library budget that we approve. It's the general fund contribution to the library.
Yes, that's all.
I think we are still statutorily required to approve the library budgets, are we not?
We are statutorily required to either support the library tax issued by the county board or levy enough in support for our own local library that we are exempt from the library tax issued by the county. So, we don't, the taxpayers would pay for the library if we didn't. I know it's the same
Apologize.
thing, but
Apologize that this is pretty small, but this is a listing of all of the funds in the city grouped by category. So we have the general fund, we have various special revenue funds, an internal service fund for risk management, the CDA, capital project funds, which would include the general capital projects as well as TIF districts, the debt service fund, and then several enterprise funds.
You don't have any, legally, there's no problem, right?
no, the legislature does not specify the form in which a budget must be adopted. It's entirely up to the municipality to decide what format.
That's the way we like it.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
So Susan, I wonder if then it would be appropriate if we wanted just to do the capital and the general fund budget.
Yes. That's fine with me.
I think you need to go back to this even if, all of these funds need to have approved budgets, even though there's no controversy about any of them. We still need to approve budgets for tourism and all of those special revenue funds. So I think that's what's on the screen right now is the template for how the agenda should be set, right? We should have an agenda item for the general fund, special revenue, just right down the page, and that makes it clean.
In the past several years, we've done a single resolution for all funds.
Right.
Prior to that, it looked like there had been motions that were made for the general fund, for capital, and then for all the other funds. Another option would be I think it's a good practice to do a resolution. You could do a resolution by each fund type. If you want to get that specific, I guess it's a question of how far you want to go and how many separate votes you want to take on the budget.
I think it's fairly simple, taking the vote shouldn't be a problem, so.
But I guess, I'm sorry. I guess my only concern, and I've only been through one of these before, and that was last year. Are we opening this up to having people strike down, basically like a line item, say, oh, we're gonna look at each separate line here separately, and we decide, we're gonna strike, I'm not gonna pick one.
Sewers, go ahead. Pick
No.
that.
I don't want to be on record as saying striking the
No, I
funding
know.
for
This
sewers,
is an
but,
example, we understand.
you know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
mean, what is the purpose? I'm trying to understand what is the purpose of separating these out? What level of granularity are we going to? And what are the unintended consequences of voting on each one of these things separately?
Larry?
Would you like me to answer that?
Just a second, I have
Yeah,
another
please.
question. If we vote on each one individually like that, that's an individual vote. And as a matter of practice, then does the mayor have the veto power over each individual vote?
Yes.
Oh,
See?
don't
That's what
want to do that.
happens.
I don't want to do that.
That's what
Okay.
happens.
I mean, my feeling, because
Becomes a
I'm,
line item veto.
Well, it's not a line item veto, but it's a resolution by
Yeah.
resolution veto.
Yeah.
That's correct.
I will say unless,
Principle, it's the
and
same.
I'm going out on a limb here, being very adamant about it, I am fully in favor of the fire hydrant fee, and if we don't get it, I will be voting against the budget. I'm willing to vote for the capital budget and these enterprise funds, but not for the operating budget. And I can explain more why I.
That's why I think it should be one vote.
Okay.
It really is the city's budget. The state does it one vote. They have amendments to each of those, but it's one vote.
So,
fine.
Larry, do you know how the other cities are doing it?
Pradeep, there isn't
There's
a
a
second
variety
to
of
the motion.
practices. I mean, I certainly represent communities that do it by multiple resolutions. I represent cities that do it this way, the way the city has done it historically. As I said, the legislature says there's no right way. It's whatever a community wants to do. So I can't tell you one method is better or worse than another. It's whatever the community decides it wants. They're all correct as long as they're accurate.
We do not have a second, so that's the end of it.
Mark
You did?
Second.
Okay.
Okay, any further discussion?
So-
Oh, sorry,
We have a member who
I mean,
we have a member who's walked out. I would request that we wait till she comes.
oh, okay, oh.
I agree. Yeah, I don't have anything to add right this moment.
Any other discussion or any,
No, we should wait till,
yeah, we will wait, yes.
You want to tell us about the s'mores tomorrow night, Mike?
Not tomorrow night?
Thursday night, right?
Tomorrow.
Oh, wait, yeah.
They're gonna have s'mores down at the plaza
Yeah.
for Good Neighbor Nights
Oh,
downtown.
There's a tap takeover at Long Table. Oh, this does not need to be in my
Awesome. 5 to 7 downtown. Be there, right?
Basically
Okay.
my birthday age party.
Yes. Good.
while we're
when,
waiting,
when is your birthday?
It's Friday,
This Friday?
this Friday.
Wow, wow, wow. Yeah, go ahead, Sue.
while we're waiting, I'd also like to encourage everyone to donate to the Canine Fund. We've made a significant improvement, or had several significant donations. And one I'd like to brag on is my grandchildren donated $14.64 of their summer chore money.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
And I have a fantastic picture
Aw.
with the police chief. And
Awesome.
Mark and Britt.
That's cool.
Nice.
And this will be a fantastic addition to the city in many ways.
Well, all right, so any other question or discussion? Otherwise, we are all here, so.
Read back the motion.
Yes, please read back the motion.
Could you read back the motion?
What I have is that the motion would ask to have separate consideration for the budget in three components: the operating, which I think we're defining as general fund, the capital budgets, and then all other funds.
Okay, that's the motion. Okay,
I would like a roll call vote on
okay, so let's have a roll call vote, please.
Kuhn,
Yes.
Burke,
No.
Keel, West,
Yes.
Olson,
No.
Ramsey,
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes.
and Richard.
No.
Okay, so what do we have?
4-4.
Okay, yes. Okay, now I have few questions here. I will start, it's on page 8. This is for you, Bill. So this is the difference between revenues and expenses. So you have a TIF district, revenue is 13.8 and the expense is 14.7. So how do you cover the difference?
The difference would be covered by fund balance within each fund. So this is just looking at a snapshot of the 2019 revenues and expenses, but the TIFs and other funds have a beginning balance. So
Okay.
that's also true for some of the utilities where the expenses are more than the revenue because there's money that's been saved and accumulated in fund balance that would be used for capital projects.
Okay, so this is, that's water utility, sewer utility, that's how it is then. Okay, okay, thank you, that helps, so. So the same way, when you end up with a total of 60 and expenditure of 63, you are going to use that reserve money.
Yeah, and if there are specific questions by fund, I can bring up, for example, the TIF budget for TIF 3 or TIF 5 to look at that, and that would show what the fund balance numbers are as well. This
Okay.
is just a summary.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Bill or anyone else?
I have questions, I have comments.
Yeah, sure, go ahead and go with comments then.
Okay. I've been thinking about this for a while in terms of budgets and the admonition that we are not living within our means and a thing called inflation that you always have to account for and doesn't go away. And since Scott Walker got into, as governor, that option for increasing our levy has been going away. And so we have every year been using the revenue, the levy from new growth coming in to take care of raises for our city employees. I was on council back when we had to actually ask them to take a cut in pay in the recession. We were able to come back, but we can't keep, we're at a point that I'm seeing and looking at revenue, new construction, and I'm beginning to sense, at least in terms of outside of the TIF district, our new construction is going to be slowing because Clarence Wall is threatening not to finish Bishop's Bay, which is one of our big sources of new construction. That we need to look into this going forward. It's not just, can we make this budget work this year? It's we've got next year, the year after, and I don't see the route that we're on as being a feasible way, especially to take care of our employees. We have got absolutely fantastic employees in all the different departments. And we've survived 2 major disasters with police, fire, and EMS stepping up really well. That's public safety. That's 40-some% of our budget. We have to be able to keep them funded. We are growing in population. I think it's about 3,000 in the last couple of years. During that same time, we've added only 4 new police officers, and the number of calls have increased 5,700, huge amount. We're talking about, and I'm slightly digressing here, but community policing. Each time we're adding calls, that takes a lot of time, and they're not necessarily 10-minute calls. Ellen was talking about a friend of hers needed a call. I have a friend whose husband committed suicide, and she drove to the police department when she found him. They were incredible in terms of taking care of him for several hours, along with EMS department. An officer stayed with her at the police department the entire time, then drove her home. This is the kind of service Middleton has, and I'm very proud that we have this kind of service. In terms of, affecting lower income people, people in apartment buildings have a higher call rate. I called up Jacob Klein this week about the water mains to find out. In his buildings, where there are WHEDA restrictions, and Abby, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, he cannot raise the rent if we put forth or approve the fire hydrant. So those rents will stay the same. He has to eat the cost. But he also said there are lots of people out there whose cars are being stolen. They need the police service. we need to keep the youth commission. What we do there is really helping build a good society. The senior center the same way, all of our parks. So if we don't do the fire hydrant, we're going to be having to lose some of those things. That's one of the things I'm really concerned about, and if we don't get it, I'm voting no.
Any other comments? Otherwise, I guess we will close the meeting.
Pretty, I'm sorry, Bill, can you go to the slide where it had your suggestions for adding to the budget? So these are pretty much, so I would make a motion that we incorporate items 1 and 2 into to the budget as recommended.
Okay, need a second. That's the exempt computer aid, EMS uniform, and general contingency, and the rec revenue, and then hiring a assistant.
I'll second that motion to have, I want to have the discussion on that.
All right.
I am interested, just, why did you pick 1 and 2, basically?
Pardon me?
I guess I'd ask, can you talk a little bit about why
Well, so
1 and 2?
number 2 is pretty easy, right? It's just
It's a wash.
it's a wash.
Okay.
Number 1, I am indifferent as to whether we increase the general contingency. Right, what we're saying, what I understand this, is that the state aid for computer aids has gone up. So it's a $6,100 increase in revenue, right? I'm willing to take this allocation of it. I'm willing to talk about whether you want to take the $4,600 and allocate it to something else. I wanted to start with 1 and 2 because I thought those were no-brainers. I'd like to get into number 3 separately.
Okay. I appreciate that breakdown for me.
Okay, any questions or comments about these 2 items? Okay, then the motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
This is just adding these to the
Yes,
budget.
yes. Okay, all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Okay, passes 7-1.
Then the second thing I'd like to talk about is number 3. Bill, can you refresh us, our memories? I don't know if we can or not, but in the personnel committee scenario, there's a line item there for the police sergeant for 25,565 in the backfill. Can you refresh our memories as to what the detail on that it was? Clearly not for a full year, but how much of it is promotion? How much of it is new staff? What is the timing of bringing these 2 recommendations online, personnel committee recommendations online?
Yeah, for the police sergeant and backfill of the officer, the amount of the $25,565, that would be a 4th quarter start for both the promotion of an existing officer to sergeant and then hiring an officer. So it's basically funding 3 months of those position changes. And I was just gonna say, I can look up.
No,
what the
that's fine.
breakdown between
I
the
thought
2.
that's what it might be. So I'm gonna make a motion that we do a couple things here. I'm gonna move that we eliminate the sustainability position, which should be about $20,000 in cost for next year. And take that amount and the $4,600 from the general contingency increase that came from 1C and use that to fund that 4th quarter addition for the sergeant and the promotion.
You need a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, let's have a discussion now, so.
And how are we going to fund this going forward? In
I've
2020?
eliminated the sustainability position.
But that's not gonna fund it in 2020.
There's the assumption that the sustainability position would be funded in 2020.
That makes it, I'm looking at a bigger,
Well, we're taking a risk that we're gonna have to absorb the full year impact of that out of whatever net new construction that we are allowed to increase our levy by in 2020. Everyone here has rolled the dice for the last 4 years about this issue.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying, we need to stop quite so risky and come up with some extra revenue.
I've given you a way to fund this position for this year.
Yes? Yes, John?
You know, we've been lectured so much by you, Mark, you know, about how looking forward and, you know, planning for the future. And you're cobbling together 1/4 of the cost of one position going forward in 2020. So Susan makes a valid point that you're only taking one thing away to fund 1/4 of what it's gonna cost us in 2020. The sustainability position pays for itself. We've gotten grants, we've gotten efficiencies in all of our buildings. This position is forward-thinking in a way that is gonna help the city move forward for inexpensive and efficient operations. That's what we wanna do. That is the farsightedness that we want, not the short-sightedness that you're trying to do. And you're trying to pit one against the other. That's exactly what we expected tonight. That this would be, if we go back to Susan's recommendation, that we go with the funding source, this would go away. This pitting one against the other, because these are both needs. And if you don't think that climate change is not a problem for our future, and the sustainability, the half-time position that we only allocate, is the only thing that's allowing us to forward think about this. So this is backwards. I am not supporting that, and I cannot, in all conscience, pit one sustainability coordinator against the police chief. That is just ridiculous.
Okay, other questions or comments? Yes, Emily?
Yeah, can you clarify for me, real quick about the levy, you taking it to the voters, because you guys said it takes a year or two. Is that on the books that we're planning to do this, or is this more of a philosophical?
Thing, we haven't decided yet. So it would be 2020.
Because
Yeah, there are two options, basically. The council would need to set up a completely separate election for November of 2019 if you wanted to do a referendum, because there are no other elections in 2019. So there'd be a cost that currently is not budgeted for 2019 to do that. Other than that, there is the option for 2020, fall of 2020, as well, when more people come out to vote. For a single issue vote, it's unlikely, and it would be at a cost that is not in the budget. And I don't know if you know what that cost is or not, but we'd have to pay a lot of folks for time, and then the cost of setting that up and with ballots and the whole bit.
And then the uncertainty of, will it pass?
Okay, so then my next question is going back to the initial proposal with the fire fees and things. If we got to using that money, would we have in 6 months another discussion about having to do somehow find money? Because I'm not trying to say it shouldn't be one versus the other. I'm not into divisive things. However, if I'm looking at 2 years out, are we gonna have the same discussion next year?
We probably are. I mean, because we can only increase the levy, or the levy only is increasing for new construction and not inflation, we have a serious problem. And you can only carry it on so many years.
But the other side of that too is that
And because we're growing with that new construction, that makes it more difficult.
the other side of that, though, to fully address your question, Emily, is that we anticipate implementing that fire protection fee in the middle of the year, so the full amount would become available in 2020, and that would double the total amount.
Okay.
So if your question was and concerns for, are we fully funding those positions? Yes, we would be fully funding them in 2019 and 2020 based on the compromise that was reached when we published the budget.
Thank you.
Well, Susan, to answer your question, we are actually, there are a lot of cities who are not, their property value is not increasing. We are fortunate that our was increasing by 3.0%.
Ours is.
I mean, we were lucky that, but there are a lot of cities where it
But
isn't
do you-
happening, so.
2 years ago, I went to a meeting for finance directors in, Bill, was it just Dane County, or it was January downtown 2 years ago. There was a lot of discussion. You were at it.
I remember the meeting, I don't remember who all attended, if it was just the
Yeah.
county, if it was statewide.
Of various municipalities. The general theme of that discussion from those municipalities were, how are we going to deal with keeping our policemen and our firemen and EMS? They were being forced into letting them go. We do not, we have to keep in mind, we have new property coming in, but we also have new people coming in, and we're growing. And that means we have to increase police, fire, EMS, public works, and then the other things that make us a really good community, which is our youth commission, public lands, the library. We're at a point where, because of our fault, we are in a very tight place, and we need to do something about it. And if we were individuals, we would go look and find another second job. Back when I was running my lab and paying for everyone's salary in the lab, I simply wrote another grant. And I was lucky and got them. But it was increasing our revenue, and that's what we've got to do.
Well, you have two parts of the equation, revenue and expenses, so, I mean, there are a lot of
I
retired.
don't think we can cut our expenses anymore.
Well,
We have been doing that for quite a few years, of keeping them level.
I just have an inquiry for Larry. It's my understanding that what is the vehicle that's before us tonight is a recommendation for finance. So any motion has to, if you're getting to that scenario one that Bill had on his PowerPoint presentation, you would have to make motions to take away those expenditures and revenues tonight, correct?
Look at scenario one, so I
I think the
understand.
council action has already defaulted this
Nope,
back to
it did
scenario
not.
one. It
No.
has.
No, it
becau-
did not, it's a resolution.
well,
The budget before us is what finance recommended, which includes both the fee and the items that Bill has on page 27.
You cannot
fire-
pass the finance committee recommended budget because the source of funding has been eliminated.
That
So-
source of funding can be brought back, and one of the people that voted against it
Or you just do a new resolution.
brings it forth again. So you, Howard, Robert, or Emily could make that motion and get it back on the table.
Or Gurdeep, couldn't he?
Or Gurdeep.
No,
No,
Gurdeep's not a
Gurdeep
member of
can't.
the council.
Yeah, but
Well,
he
he's
voted
a member of
against
the
it.
council for purposes of voting on this.
But for bringing forth a new motion,
I believe so, Larry.
Well, we've had this debate before, but, yes, he is.
You've advised me for a long time that the mayor's a member of the council. He just doesn't always get to vote.
Right. He doesn't count in the attendance of the council that, there's a lot of other.
yes,
Yeah, I, to continue on this conversation, which really has nothing to do with the vote at hand, I guess my question to whoever can answer this is, we just had a referendum. That's not a question. We are talking about raising taxes potentially for, for the fire protection services. And then, no matter what happens, we're talking about asking the community, the residents of Middleton, to also sometime in the future, maybe 2020, vote to increase their taxes in another referendum. And at some point, are we basically making it impossible to get that final referendum through if every year we're going back to them saying, well, taxes just went up, oh, well, taxes just went up again. I guess that's a concern that I have, and I value any thoughts or discussion on the topic.
Well, one of the things that I liked about the fire protection fee is that it was spread over all parcel owners. So it wasn't just the city had to pay it, the school district has to pay it, nonprofits have to pay it, everybody's gotta pay it. It really is the most equitable way to come up with a funding source because nobody's exempt from it.
And actually,
Well,
that's in
Kathy,
a very,
please, Kathy, you had a hand up?
Well, I was just going to comment on the slide that Bill put out where it shows all the cities and where we fall in our taxes. And that, I think, is what the people look at is, are we paying more than other people? And we are on the low end of that. And I would, Bill, I don't know, Verona, I think Epic probably has a big impact on how low their taxes are. So I think that what we're doing is justifiable because we are on the low end of everything else.
in addition, Robert, we pay for garbage collection in our city taxes, which means that the churches and so on. All these other municipalities, the individual citizens.
Oh, that's not right. Commercial pays for their own.
Commercial pays for their
Commercial
own.
does pay for their own.
Yes, Mike?
I just wanted to respond to Robert in one way, because I know he really cares about the details. And
He's an engineer.
you did say fire protection services, and I wanted to be very clear that we're not talking about funding fire protection services. We're talking about a fee for the use of the fire hydrants, and we call it a public fire protection fee. But it's about water capacity.
You are absolutely correct, and that was a misstatement on my part, and I appreciate that I stand corrected. Thank you.
I just, Bill, I have a question for you, that the taxes which the people pay is depending upon what is the value of their property multiplied by the levy. So in case of Middleton, our tax total assessed value is only second to Madison, 3.545 billion. So that means our houses or properties are at a higher assessed value when you compare to, for example, Verona or Fitchburg or Sun Prairie. So the total taxes which are paid by the average homeowner would be, not proportionally, because their houses are valued higher, they will end up paying maybe somewhat similar to it. I'd like to get some more information on that.
All of these comparisons that I've included in here between different municipalities are looking at equalized rates. So they are based on 100% valuation, and that's based on the equalization that's done by the State Department of Revenue. So it factors out differences in the assessment levels from one community to another and looks at if everything were at full market value, what would be the tax rate?
Okay, so the question here is that 3-bedroom house may be $400,000 here, but the same will be more like $350,000 in Sun Prairie.
I mean,
On how it
there
works.
certainly can be differences in individual properties from one community to another, but when looking at these tax rates, it's based on equalized value. So it's saying that a property that would be fair market value in Middleton at 300,000, this is what the tax rate compared to a property with a fair market value of 300,000 in any one of these other communities.
And exactly, but that would be, you're not comparing the same property. Otherwise, we have $3.5 billion in total,
That's not how it works,
total
Gertie.
assets.
That's not how it works. So if you look at Wexford Village, which is right next to us, and there's a $350,000 house right across the border from Middleton, they're paying $9 per thousand on that house. We're paying $5.94. So it's not about, it's not about the total value in the community, it's about the mill rate, which is $5.94, compared to almost $9 in Madison. That's what you look at, and that's why Bill's using that comparison. What you're getting at is so off the wall, it's not even logical.
It's not off the wall at all.
Yes, it is.
How otherwise could you have assessed value even higher than Sun Prairie, higher than Fitchburg?
Why? Because we have a very vibrant industrial park.
Well, Fitchburg
That's
has
why.
Fitchburg
Not
has-
for the homeowner, for the industrial park. When you have high-value organizations and companies, they pay a lot of property taxes on the value that's on their property. So when you're talking multi-million-dollar properties, that gets into your assessed value for the entire community.
And a significant portion of our taxes, our levy is paid by the businesses.
Well,
I
I
think
like-
at least, what, 50%?
About 43%.
43?
That's what I was gonna say.
But I wonder, like Fitchburg.
It's higher than everybody else in Dane County.
It's somewhat higher. or-
Percentage-wise,
Higher.
our commercial sector pays more as a proportion of the overall property tax, and that's
Okay,
about
thank
43%.
Howard?
Mr. Mayor, might I suggest, so that we can expedite our discussions this evening, I would suggest you put that idea of yours to rest, and so we can go on.
Thank you.
It's not
Good,
gonna
good
go-
suggestion. All right.
Not gonna go anywhere.
Yes.
I would like to ask our esteemed former school board member over here, the resolution for the new schools, which I hope everybody voted for. Yeah.
Could you please?
That's gonna hit the tax rolls in what, 2020, 21?
This year.
When's it gonna hit the tax rolls for the people?
Next year.
Next year? Full or just partial?
Partial for the operating costs.
Partial.
And we don't need to expend all the money for the construction. We have 4 years to do that.
4 years.
Yep.
And you'll probably burn all those 4 years up doing it.
What do you mean burn it up?
You'll take 4 years.
Yeah, because we're not gonna do everything at once. I mean, the high school is gonna be
So-
multi-year.
People in Middleton next year can expect, because of the schools, an increase of how much?
I can't give you that number off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
Not very big, it's just for the operating.
Right, right.
So, everybody think about this, that over the next few years, we're gonna be looking at incrementally, I think, increasing taxes that are probably not as a result of the city's operation, but more so for the school. But when the taxpayer gets a bill, they think it's us. And it's unfortunate that people don't.
I disagree. They blame the schools. They blame the schools. They
I'm not
look.
blaming- they blame
No,
the-
no, they see that it's the school that has the majority of the tax money.
But it affects us, it affects our ability to.
Right.
And it's really unfortunate. So when you're thinking about what you're gonna do, whatever you, think about that. It's gonna be probably another 4 or 5 years of rough sailing.
Howard, to your point, though, 91% of registered voters in Middleton voted,
I know.
and 72% voted for the school referendum.
I know.
It's going to add a heck of a lot more than the fire protection fee.
$50, yeah.
I'm not arguing with you.
While I'm at the microphone, can I answer Robert's question about how you deal with this?
I would appreciate it, thank you.
You do what the school district has done every time we've had to go to referendum, and that's you get facts out to the community, and you hold hearings, you have meetings, you have slide presentations, you explain why this is important, and you answer questions, and you're open and above board about it. And that's, I think, what the district, that's that's what the school district expects of us. And I think that's why we get the amount of resolution that we do.
Thank you,
I
Alan.
would agree with that. When I've talked with constituents, explain that we cannot we do not have a way of increasing revenue for inflation. They get it. End of discussion.
Because we've been doing it in the school district for years. Okay, I'll stop talking.
And any businessman who's
I'd
responsible.
be glad to be a consultant for the council to go out and organize those.
You just hired a
Thank
good
you.
consultant.
Yeah. Right, well,
Run for
no.
the council.
I would do it for free, Howard, because I want to see this,
Want to do it for free?
I want to see this water fire protection thing passed. How's that for a bargain?
Thank you, Alan.
Talk to you after.
Okay, so the motion is,
I just have a comment.
Yeah.
Talking about what your property values are. I'm happy with my property values where they are. I would hate to see them go backwards. If we have more crime, drugs, gangs, your property value goes down. Where are we then?
I'm with you. I want my
Yeah.
property. I'm happy with my
The
property
ci-
as well.
And having the police interact positively with the kids instead of some other person that you don't want them interacting with. I think that this is so important.
Absolutely. Okay, so the motion is, you want to read the motion? Bill?
The motion was
Robert did,
to
yeah.
eliminate the sustainability coordinator position and use the funding for that position plus the $4,688 allocated to general contingency from the increased exempt computer aid to fund the hiring of a sergeant and backfilling of a police officer in the fourth quarter of next year.
Okay, thank you.
The sustainability coordinator at its current budgeted level is about $27,000 roughly. So we're talking about a total of about $31,600.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions or comments on that one?
I've got concerns that we're not dealing with the big picture issue of we need an increase in revenue. And I'm uncomfortable voting on these little teeny tiny line item things until we decide what our actual pot of money is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the motion is, you already heard the motion. All those,
Wait a second, we'll call a vote.
okay. Bill, could you have a roll call vote, please?
Kuhn,
Yes.
Burke,
No?
Keel,
No.
West,
No.
Olson,
No.
Ramsey,
No.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Chard.
No.
Okay, so the motion fails. Okay.
Adamant.
This is my last budget. It better be adamant.
Okay, so what do you, I mean, is there anything you could adjourn now, or that's it?
I think we're in council deliberation, so.
So I guess that my inquiry then is at a good point then, Larry, if you could just walk us through what the finance committee recommended to the budget and what's before us is the finance recommended budget with the revenue source and with the items that are listed on 27. Is that correct? So anything, any motion would have to be to remove these items to get to a balance if you want to remove the revenue source.
I think that's right.
So, let me weigh in here. The council has already acted to not consider the funding source. So why isn't it by default then that we're back to a balanced budget? If we don't have the revenue, we are defaulted back to what's in scenario one, regardless of whether we vote or not.
I think the issue is you have a budget document that has been circulated to the public. You have a budget presentation that's been made on that basis. And at some point soon, you'll have to vote to adopt a budget. There is an obvious disconnect between the current status of things. I think just as you move to amend the budget, this would be a budget amendment as well, because the source of revenue has dried up in its current situation.
So what would be the effect of passing the budget as it is publicized without the funding source?
We're not faced with that yet, are we? That's a hypothetical question. I
But
don't
we
think
will
we're-
be, we could be
That's why
faced
we
with
pay
this
you
in
the
about a
big
week.
bucks, Larry.
Let's see where we go.
I will say again, this can be solved if one of the four of you will
It can
Make
be
a
solved with one of the other fours agreeing to what was agreed to at the council meeting.
No,
You can't have this both ways, right? Budgets are about choices.
yes.
And we have this, the majority of this council, the majority of this body has said that we do not want to increase taxes by moving these fees to the
Okay.
utility.
I've
That's
said-
what the council has said.
Then there's probably 4 no votes. And maybe more. But if one of the people that voted to remove fire protection fee will ask for it to be reconsidered,
Then I'll
Vote
move
on
we
it.
adjourn, because we're just not gonna get to this.
Need
Or I
a
don't
s-
believe we're gonna.
Need
get
a
to this.
second?
I'll second it.
Okay, well, motion is to adjourn. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
So it's 4-4, and I,
No,
No.
What?
two people that wanted to
2-6.
adjourn.
2-6?
2-6.
Okay.
6-2.
We heard two for adjournment, Mark and Emily. Is there
Okay.
anybody else?
Oh, that's it, okay.
2-6.
I tried.
Somebody wanna order pizza?
Yeah, I'm gluten free.
What would be the next step now that we're not adjourned? What more discussion?
With the fire protection.
Right now,
It's in there. So I think the motion would be, is
To adopt the-
to adopt the
to adopt the-
resolution.
To adopt the
adopt-
recommended budget.
No, in the past, we have had a
could do
public
that
meeting
too.
and we did not adopt the budget at the same time.
We could do
What we're
that too.
talking about.
No, we are going to adopt the budget at the next meeting.
Correct.
We are not adopting the budget now, it's at the
But
next
you
meeting.
are voting on what the budget would be
Yes.
that would be adopted at the next meeting.
Well, then I'll make a motion that we move forward the finance recommended budget to the council for the, is it the November
number 20th.
20th meeting?
And that includes the.
Yep.
And that was the PC scenario on your sheet, on page 4 of your handout in the packet.
Second.
Okay, further discussion now.
Larry, permissible to make an alternate motion at this time? And I will make a recommendation, I will make a motion that the council approve scenario 1 that removes the water protection fees from
I think that's out of order, because the negative of my motion would be to consider other options. I think that is not an appropriate substitute.
Yeah, when I said you could say something different, it can't be both at the same time. That's the problem. I didn't know what the motion was gonna be, of course, when I said that.
and I'll withdraw it.
Any further discussion?
So what exactly are we voting on? This is getting confusing.
The original finance budget.
Which
PC
has.
scenario did include the revenue source
Yep.
of the public fire protection
Okay,
fee.
so it will include the revenue source.
That's the one that was published through action of the
Okay.
council.
Okay, so Any questions or, yes, Robert?
Not sure how to say this. I think the way the motion was worded was to go back to the original budget, which I guess
Finance
there is a difference
budget.
between scenario one and PC scenario, I believe.
It's the finance, I said the recommended finance committee
Which,
recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And that, just for my understanding, that was the PC scenario?
Yeah.
Roll call vote, please.
Okay, so, yes.
Kuhn,
Hold on a second.
It's gonna be this column here.
Can I pass? I'm new at this. Robert Rules.
Yes, you can pass.
okay, Burke,
Comes back to me.
No.
Keel.
Oh.
West,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Ramsey,
Yes?
Sullivan,
No.
and Richard.
Yes.
Passes 4-3. Right?
Unless
No,
Emily-
she-
No, she still has to
No,
vote.
she
Oh,
does.
we can come back to you, Emily. First vote.
Well, she can if she wants to, but otherwise, she can abstain.
I think she would like to vote.
Well, that's fine.
Let Emily decide.
You know. Can I call for a recess? I need a few minutes.
Can we do that in the middle of a vote?
Take your time out in the middle of a vote, Larry.
It's unusual, but I certainly don't think we need to make any members of the council uncomfortable, so sure.
Thank you, everyone.
This is not fun for any of us.
They're still next week.
Vote should be the same as it was last time in front of the finance committee and in front of the council. Only way this is good. This is not a compromising council.
I've changed my mind. People have changed their mind before. Compromise is not, but it's, I don't think that'll make me the hero of the hour either. See if there's something you think.
What I was gonna say, if it's a positive vote, is they should formally consider the motion, the logic. We don't know yet whether it will be, so I didn't think it was necessary, but it certainly would be necessary if,
Huh?
maybe a little out of order, but.
Your comment.
I'm not running for reelection.
Really?
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
I'd go back into the
I
administration.
actually,
so
I have the league handbook. I actually intended to bring more, but I left it all in the office.
April.
19.
Yeah, but I have to declare by December 1st, so I signed my paperwork today.
Yeah, if you're not gonna run
Yeah.
by December 1st, you have to.
Paragraph 3, first sentence. I wanted to be prepared.
Oh, it's one of the few home rule
Yeah.
things that we still have.
Yeah, they don't describe how you put it out, but then they prescribe how much you can levy.
years, I've done everything I can.
Yeah, but it's hard. It's, you know, it's,
I've gone against my principles.
Bottom line is, you know,
I'm asking
people actually need
guys won't compromise.
most people don't know.
Every single year for the last 4 years, I have said you should not be adding staff because it's gonna eat up every bit of increment that we can get. Every year, we had to bend and figure out ways to get dollars to get additional staff. And now I gave you an out for the police officer and nobody wants to take it. Help me understand why that is.
I don't like it because of the sustainability position. Who we had, she made money. She saved us money. When each department was presenting their budget, and they say, we're reducing the utility line by this much. All of that stuff adds up, and I don't think that we want to go backwards with that.
Can't. All that stuff is locked in.
No, I mean, we want to go forward. We want
But
to.
that's the whole point.
She's got grants for the solar, she's got, that have to
But
be
that's the whole
executed now.
point, is that not because of the way this works. Just because she's not here doesn't mean you're going backwards.
I didn't say that. If we
Everything
eliminate
that
that-
everything that she's done is locked in for the future.
We still have to administer the grants that she's received for the different solar projects, and we have, no, this is.
It's about compromise. The reality is, I can honestly say that I have given about stuff.
But Mark, it's about the vote. You know. I respect your knowledge of all the finances and stuff, but when it comes down to our priorities, some of those are different.
Down, okay? But I have found funding sources for all these things.
so what would be the procedure if,
So if she flips, because obviously she will.
Well, I thought when you came up with it, having just a third of it go towards the positions and then having the capital reserve funding, I thought that was great.
Here's the thing, but you don't understand, is that the public safety piece of that should be embedded as a first priority, because we are committed to spending those things. Right?
but they have, what about,
That should be the first priority.
so if
The rest
it
of the
doesn't,
personnel
if no one
things,
did,
those are incremental to the plan. We have made commitments for public safety.
Vote, I think that would control.
Nobody seems to recognize that those are the things that should be embedded in the plan before anybody talks about adding stuff.
It's an act of greater dignity.
That's the budget game that you have to
Greater dignity.
right? So here's what's going to happen.
Consistency, the budget.
At the end of the year, if the capital plan and the operating plan, I'm sorry, if the capital budget and the operating budget come in this year, we're in a $260,000 hole going into next year.
I don't know, I can't remember. We do it by resolution or ordinance?
Because we have already committed to spending every one of those dollars.
Could be. Well, I
So
certainly
you have a
think we should
choice.
clean that up, and if we
I'm
can,
putting you in the choice.
We
Make the
are-
choice. You can spend
you know, I don't want to go through.
however
an
much
issue
money you
that
want.
implied
You have $300,000.
undoing of a
$300,000,
resolution. This is.
100,000 of it has to go to the library. Now you have $200,000 left. You have to pay your people,
Everyone else voted the same way as they did last time, so.
and you're facing potential liability of $250,000 for public safety.
It's in Emily's hands.
That's the choice.
I'm not sure what she's going through. I don't think we have any right to ask her what she's doing.
no one can talk about this.
I'm not suggesting. I think everyone's in the room, aren't they? So that's good, that's how it should be.
We're seeing what happens.
See how long it lasts?
It's already gotten to the point where I'm ready to shave it all.
Because of you or because of
Just
opinions at home?
Family wants me to grow it out. See
Do
what
they?
happens.
See what happens? Gonna be awfully grass.
This is my fault. I've had the dyke before, the mustache and chin, but, yeah, as soon as I get stuff here,
On the sides?
it really bothers me.
I always shave, sometimes in November I let it grow, but I always go up to,
I've had that style.
my kids.
You make it look a lot better than I am.
Oh, I'm sure of that.
Well, you had did you have a mustache with your picture that I see on Facebook?
I probably,
I think you had.
My wife hates the way I look with facial hair. I like the way I look with facial hair, so sometimes in Facebook I will use a picture that I choose. But it might be a couple of years old. I think my Skype picture, I don't know if it's Skype.
I don't know, I just thinking I saw something with you with the.
My kids tell me that I can't shave. I didn't know who the hell it was. My wife hates it, but she's hated it for so many years now. I think she's used to it.
Pick a different
I don't, yeah, right, exactly. I hate shaving.
I found though, I will admit, when I had facial hair like that, I spent probably just as much time, because the same hair, you know, edging, right? So, for me,
Take the trimmer.
I use an electric shaver, so
Oh, do you?
for me, it's like, it's pretty delicate. You don't want to get hairs ripped out of your face, edging the whole top.
I went back to, gone back to, you know, you can get those quattro braids, and all those ones with fancy names. I've gone back to the old fashioned safety razor.
The safety razor on the straight or the other Dollar Shave Club.
No, I don't. Again, this is where I got this one. Boy, it works just as well as the ones that have 3 or 4 blades in them for a heck of a lot less money. I go buy blades for my Gillette Sensor 3 or 10 or whatever. They're like $15 for 5 or something.
No, they're like $4 or $5 a piece.
It's terrible.
Buying at Costco, you get like 12 for $4.
Everybody doesn't have a beard.
One that I always wondered about. My father actually, for a while, went back for a phase, like 3 years. The mug, the soap, the brush, and the straight razor.
Oh,
And I'm like,
I'm not that brave.
I have seen now probably 3 times the Stephen Sondheim musical, Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber, and I just struggle even pulling a straight razor anywhere near my face. I'm like,
yeah. Not for me.
I always wondered how close I could get it with a straight razor. The trick is getting the angle.
You gotta get the angle right.
If you get the angle wrong, you're gonna have a mess.
Yeah.
Usually a red mess.
Remember in the old days, they used to have those white antiseptic sticks? Make yourself. I wish those things were.
But they solved the problem.
Chemical cauterization, basically.
Before they had
I don't know, I didn't find it.
Any more rabbits that we can pull out of any hats? I don't know what they do.
I tried.
And I voted against that because I don't think that's so
It's about choices, right? It's about choices. We have a balloon that doesn't take any more air. So you pick and choose what you want, what your priorities are. That's what it comes down to.
It's okay. Doesn't matter to me.
This is
Talking
kind
to
of
somebody,
impressive.
talking to your husband.
Well, you know, conscientious and sure what your vote means. If you're not sure,
I don't like sitting in that position either.
Being first? That is tough for the new person.
Yeah, for a new person it is.
Especially after you discuss something for a half an hour. What was that motion again?
When you were the board on the committee for the council when John DiPiazza was here, and he has to go and see what kind of assets that we, extra assets were available.
He wanted to sell off on the property.
Well, I was thinking when they were talking about the trailhead and, yeah, that trailhead. Somebody came in here and they said that the city owns a lot of land on Century there. That, and I don't think anybody, I mean, why wouldn't we sell something to that?
I don't know
There's a plot
that
of
that.
land between, there's another access point between where the Goodwill store is and the house. Right, all it does is get you back to the conservatory.
He was saying a different one. He was saying something but are you saying the red, is it a red house?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Is it pretty big lot of land?
No,
No, it's just a strip.
it's a strip of land that
But
goes
it's-
back into the conservatory.
But it's between Goodwill and Blue House, right? That house that kind of sits down in the.
Well, there's so many times where they come in and give, where they give it to the person, would vacate it.
Vacate?
Why would you vacate it? You would want it.
No, I'm
You'd have
saying,
to declare it surplus and hope that that the property owner would want to buy it.
One of the property owners on either side would go up.
I was saying, other times where we've done that, like on Mary Street, where they vacated it, and then they got to absorb that land, and then the next week they put the house up for sale.
Well, but the issue, I don't know, you'd have to ask Larry whether the property owner has to accept it.
No, they don't.
You can vacate it, but if the property owner doesn't accept it, it just sits there and it's available for sale. I think what you're asking for is that if the city vacates it, the property owner takes it, and therefore the property owner and pay tax on it. What happens if he doesn't?
And not only that, the tax that you get from it is minuscule.
No, I'm saying, I didn't know if there's any property that would be like worth, selling. I mean, there's something that would be extra. We don't need.
So what you're asking is, does Middleton have any surplus
Yeah, they want
land?
a lot of land.
We do, it's over permit term. It's over permit term. Well, you were asking,
Now we do.
and we've got an asking price,
And we
2.63 million.
a lot of the downtown stuff, eventually we might be able to consolidate.
So next door to us, Tim owns that lot. So, you could ask a question, why are you holding it?
Well, I think with this plan, there's 120, the plan to come up with something for the downtown civic campus. I think when that happens, there's gonna be a lot of, where you can combine services and different departments and stuff. I think there's gonna be some savings.
Okay, guys, let's get started.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I educated myself. Thanks.
Okay,
My vote is yes.
Sorry?
My vote is yes.
Okay. We were discussing this during the break, and since we have the resolution that is to the contrary, it would certainly be in order for one of the people who voted in favor of the resolution to offer a motion to reconsider it at this time.
those who opposed it, not opposed.
Those who opposed it.
Well,
Oh, okay, yes.
Was in the majority.
The prevailing side,
Yeah.
whoever is on the prevailing side ought to logically, offer a motion to reconsider that resolution at this point.
But if they don't,
Well, then we have an interesting situation.
no,
I
they
will
don't
make
have
the
to, right?
motion.
I'm sorry?
I will make the motion.
Okay.
Then can anyone second it?
Anyone can second.
I will second.
Okay, any discussion on that?
Everyone understands that you're talking about the public fire protection fee.
Right.
For which the council voted in the negative on November 6th. Thank you. So it's a motion to reconsider that vote.
Okay, so
Just a point of order. Can this motion be vetoed?
No,
No.
it's not an ordinance.
you couldn't veto resolution?
Right, I believe, and
Sometime.
Bill and I think this is the case, Larry, that the motion to reconsider doesn't actually approve it.
That's
It
correct.
just reconsider.
But we can
brings
put it
the
on the
topic back.
November 20th ballot, or, meeting, yeah.
That's correct, and, you know, the motion can be, to reconsider can be made without it being on the agenda, but I would think that at the budget adoption meeting, if the motion is to reconsider, then it comes back for a vote on the actual reconsideration of the original resolution vote. So this is just a vote to reconsider the action of the common council on that resolution.
Now, to Mark's question about the resolution itself, the resolution were approved, that is not a vetoable item,
Well,
but
some
the budget would
resolutions
be.
are and some aren't. That's a more complex question than you think.
Are you saying you don't know the answer yet? You have to
I
look
do
into it?
not know the answer to that yet.
Okay. So what we would do, if the council votes in the affirmative, is to put the resolution back on the council agenda of November 20th for an up or down vote.
Correct.
We would do that before we'd have the various budget items
Correct.
listed.
And by that time, you would know whether or not Milton.
I will know. Yes.
So this is simply a motion to, well, this is a motion to reconsider. Any other questions or comments? So,
Roll call
well,
vote.
let's have a roll call vote, please.
Okay, Kuhn,
Yes.
Burke,
No.
Keel. West,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Ramsey,
Yes?
Sullivan,
No?
and Richard.
Yes.
I
Okay,
believe
so
it's
the
5-3 again.
motion passes 5-3, so.
So we reconsider.
I'll move adjournment.
Second.
We want to talk about the other, like, we talked about the funds that came in, and we passed 1 and 2. Do we want to look at 3, increasing the hours for sustainability? Or do we want to just
I think we should adjourn.
just leave it? Okay.
Okay, the motion, did
Do it
somebody
next-
second it?
Do it next week.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously. So we